They have a wonderful Christian pastor. He's a wonderful man, Pastor Brunson. They made up this phony charge that he's a spy, and he's not a spy. He's going through a trial right now, if you call it a trial. They should have given him back a long time ago.
Oh, that's President Trump demanding the release of American pastor Andrew Brunson. This after Turkey rejected an appeal to free him. The move comes amid escalating tensions between the two NATO allies, as both sides are ramping up the pressure on each other. So, what does this mean for our relations with Ankara and for the pastor's release? Jim Walsh, an international security expert and senior research associate at MIT Security Studies Program, joins us from Cambridge. So, Jim, some reports tonight say the Turkish diplomats they're trying to hammer out some type of deal to free Brunson from house arrest, because man, oh man, the president really hit Turkey hard. Do you think they expected this?
I don't think they did. But before I go any further, Eric, I have to say that I just watched that interview Arthel did on Aretha Franklin, and it was spectacular. And I'm afraid, my friend, you and I have a tough thing to match here. But let's do our best.
That is true. That is true. Following Arthel and Fonzie,
it was unbelievable.
Absolutely.
Yeah, unbelievable. But let me speak to, I'm glad, I'm happy to hear that there are negotiations going on that might resolve this, because it would be bad if it gets worse. I blame Turkey. I think the president is correct in his stance, but we're dealing with a Turkish president who is stubborn, who has autocratic tendencies. This trial that the pastor is undergoing now, they have secret witnesses. I think it violates all sorts of protocols that you would expect in a fair trial. So it's bad, but I hope it gets resolved, because Turkey, there are a lot of equities in play. Turkey is a member of NATO. Turkey is sort of the center of the emerging markets investment in terms of finance and loans. So if they were if this were to deteriorate, and if Turkey were to deteriorate, that would be a bad thing. So I welcome those discussions.
What are the dangers to the relationship? You know, they've got the Incirlik air base, which has been very vital. They are a NATO ally, although they certainly sometimes don't act like that. And we mentioned Erdogan. Right. I mean, he's really basically a dictator, jailing journalists, jailing lawyers, jailing opponents. I mean, he's really cracked down, and it's not the democracy that we've known in the past.
Eric, I think you're absolutely right. After the attempted coup, he detained 160,000 people, tens of thousands in the first few days afterwards. You know, I find it highly unlikely, to the point of incredulity, that they suddenly had evidence on tens of thousands of people who were who were allegedly traitors. This seemed like a power grab at the time. I said it to you when we talked about it at the time, and it has gone downhill since there. Moreover, the issues in the U.S.-Turkish relationship have been complicated by Erdogan's now going after the Kurds. The Kurds are a U.S. ally in the fight against ISIS. So there are many troubling aspects to this. But as you put your finger on it, Turkey is vital. Look at a map. It is the land link between Europe and the Middle East. It has been an important NATO ally going back to the days of John F. Kennedy and the Cuban Missile Crisis. And so we don't want
the missiles out. He saw that by pulling the missiles out of Turkey.
Exactly. So we don't want to see Erdogan flip and go to Russia or go to some other alliance. That would be unwelcome. And as I say, there are real financial issues here. Turkey's economy has received lots and lots of loans from the Europeans. We know from the economic crisis we had before that these banks are interlocked. If there are problems in Turkey, and if those lead to problems with bank loans in Europe, that could have worldwide implications. So I think we have to keep an eye on this and hope that it stabilizes.
And why are they putting the pressure on Brunson? Do you think it was just to try to do a swap, a prisoner swap with Gulen, the exiled Turkish cleric who Erdogan has blamed for trying to overthrow his government, rightly or not?
I think that's certainly a possibility. It seems clumsy if that was the motivation. I mean, we really don't know Erdogan's motivation. I mean, it may be. Listen, when you're arresting detaining 160,000 people, you were just picking and choosing and picking and choosing. This guy the pastor might have had an enemy who saw this as an opportunity to get even. I mean, there are any number of explanations, but cooler heads should have prevailed. And it's, at least according to press reports, the president had worked out an arrangement in which he got Israel to release a Turkish citizen, and Turkey was supposed to follow through, and they never did. And so I'm bewildered by it, frankly.
And finally, October 12th is another hearing for Brunson. I mean, how do you think, who climbs down first? How do you think this finally gets resolved?
Well, you would think that Turkey would climb down first because the lira, its currency, has taken such a beating, and that might set off a whole set of other things that no one wants to have happen. But, my experience is when you have two strong personalities, you've got to find a third way, another door to get around it so that everyone gets to save face. My guess is that's what those conversations that you referred to at the top of our interview, that's probably what that's meant to do.
All right, we'll see what happens. Our message tonight to President Erdogan: release Pastor Andrew Brunson, period. Jim Walsh, thank you.
Yes.
Arthel?
Thank you.
Well, a community grieving the loss. And we are learning more about the murders of a pregnant Colorado woman and her two daughters. Police have arrested the victim's husband and father in the case. Meanwhile, the community is trying to cope with the incredible loss. Jeff Paul is live from Los Angeles with more. So, Jeff, tell us what's the latest on the investigation. And there's more I'll ask you in a moment. Just if you could tell us more in the investigation first.
Well, yeah, Arthel, court documents reveal the man's two kids have been submerged in crude oil for 4 days before being discovered by investigators. We're also learning the suspect's lawyer is asking for DNA samples to be taken from the kid's neck, as well as samples from the hands and nails of the girl's mother. Investigators say Christopher Watts killed his pregnant wife, Shanann, and their two little girls, Bella and Celeste, inside the family's home. He was arrested this week after police say he confessed to their deaths. But just a day before, Watts was giving interviews, pleading for the family's safe return. Take a listen.
My kids are my life. I mean, those smiles light up my life. I want everybody to just come home. Like, wherever they're at, come home. That's what I want.
Their bodies, though, were later found at a petroleum facility where the suspect once worked. But the big question that investigators have yet to answer is why this all happened. There's been zero talk so far of any motive. We also don't know the exact cause of death either. Arthel?
I mean, neighbors have to be so shocked and just outright stunned. What are they saying?
Yeah, Arthel, this town where this all happened in is Frederick, Colorado. It's home to about 8,500 people, so this family was known by a lot of people in the area, and that was clear judging by the amount of people who turned out for a vigil last night. Hundreds of people, including many moms and dads who brought their kids along, as well as other people within the community, showed up outside the family's home. They mostly stood in silence, reflecting on what police say happened, praying for the lives lost.
Heart-wrenching. It's not real. It's too close to home. It's painful. We all have kids.
Investigators will formally charge Christopher Watts on Monday. He's in jail right now and will likely make his next court appearance on Tuesday. Arthel?
Jeff Paul, thank you.
Well, President Trump is now responding to reports that White House counsel Don McGahn, he's been cooperating extensively, they say, with special counsel Robert Mueller's investigation. We'll have a live report.
All right, so visitors are flocking to SoCal to get a whiff of one smelly attraction. The Huntington Library showing off a corpse flower, yeah. The plant is known for the rotten stench it releases once it blooms.
Wonderful. The library says, the flower is named Stink. That's the name of the flower. That's one of 3 corpse flowers expected to bloom within the next week. But the flower, it unexpectedly started opening on Thursday. The bloom, they say, lasts only for 24 hours, and it normally takes, get this, about 15 years for a corpse flower to reach a mature bloom. Huh.
I would want to go just to smell it. I've never smelled one.
No, I'll stick with roses and tulips.
That's boring. Let's go to smell this stinky flower. John Scott up next.
Fox News confirming this hour that a top White House lawyer has spoken with Robert Mueller at length, sitting down with the special counsel 3 separate times. It comes as the New York Times reports White House counsel Don McGahn is cooperating extensively with Mueller's investigation. And now the president is reacting to it all on Twitter. I'm John Scott, and this is the Fox Report. Fox News has not independently confirmed some of the details in the New York Times report, but we have confirmed that McGahn took part in 3 voluntary interviews with special counsel Mueller. In its reporting, the Times characterizes those meetings, writing in part, quote, Mr. McGahn laid out how Mr. Trump tried to ensure control of the investigation, giving investigators a mix of information both potentially damaging and favorable to the president. Mr. McGahn cautioned investigators that he never saw Mr. Trump go beyond his legal authorities, though the limits of executive power are murky. Let's go to Ellison Barber. She is in Berkeley Heights, New Jersey, near the president's golf club in Bedminster. The president is weighing in on this, Ellison.
He is, John, as he often does. He's weighing in on this on Twitter. Earlier this evening, he tweeted this, quote, I allowed White House counsel Don McGahn and all other requested members of White House staff to fully cooperate with the special counsel. In addition, we readily gave over 1 million pages of documents, most transparent in history, no collusion, no obstruction. Witch hunt. A source familiar with the investigation confirms to Fox News that McGahn spoke with the Mueller team at length on 3 different occasions. The New York Times is reporting a whole lot of details, including that those interviews added up to more than 30 hours. At least a dozen sources told the New York Times that McGahn is cooperating extensively with the special counsel. In interviews with Mueller's teams, the Times says that McGahn described the president's furor over the investigation and gave, quote, a clear view of the president's most intimate moments with his lawyer. McGahn's cooperation supposedly began because it's what the president's first legal team wanted. They reportedly thought that full collaboration would help bring the probe to a quick end. The idea that Mr. Trump would want McGahn to openly speak with the special counsel reportedly struck McGahn and his attorney as odd. According to the New York Times, McGahn and his lawyer became concerned that Trump might be setting Mr. McGahn up to take the blame for any possible illegal acts of obstruction. Instead of letting that happen, the Times says that McGahn and his lawyer decided to cooperate as much as possible. John Dowd, the president's former top outside counsel, called allegations of apprehensions about McGahn's cooperation with Mueller's team fiction. When he spoke with Fox News a little earlier this evening, he also told us that, in his words, Don McGahn was a very strong witness for the president. John?
And Ellison, the president's former aide, Omarosa Manigault Newman, spent a lot of this week releasing those conversations she secretly recorded with people in the administration. Is there any worry at the White House that more tapes are on the way?
Well, the White House made pretty clear this week at a press briefing that they do not want this to be something that anyone is talking about, particularly those in the media, and that they feel like Omarosa Manigault Newman is not a credible source. Omarosa Manigault Newman, on the other hand, has made it very clear that she has no intention of sitting down or staying quiet.
There are things that I write about, and then there are things that I'm going to save to share when the time is right. He is completely unhinged, pardon the pun, but what you're seeing is the unraveling of the 45th president of the United States.
According to a new report in the Associated Press, Manigault Newman has more than just audio tapes. The AP, citing a person with direct knowledge, says that she has a stash of videos, emails, text messages, and other documentation supporting the claims in her tell-all book. The Trump campaign filed a formal complaint against Manigault Newman. They say that she violated a 2016 confidentiality agreement. Her publisher, Simon & Schuster, called that a hollow legal threat, and they also said that they would not allow her to be intimidated. John?
Ellison Barber with the president in New Jersey. Ellison, thank you. Meanwhile, President Trump defending his decision to pull former CIA Director John Brennan's lifetime security clearance. More than a dozen top former intelligence officials slamming the president's move as an attempt to stifle free speech, a claim the president denies, telling reporters he never respected Brennan. Mr. Trump doubling down on that sentiment, tweeting, "Has anyone looked at the mistakes that John Brennan made while serving as CIA director? He will go down as easily the worst in history, and since getting out, he has become nothing less than a loudmouth partisan political hack who cannot be trusted with the secrets to our country." National security correspondent Jennifer Griffin joins us with more from Washington. Given the backlash, Jennifer, after the revoking of John Brennan's security clearance, will the president likely stop there?
No, there are very clear signs, John, that President Trump is preparing to strip the security clearances of 8 more top former intelligence officials and 1 current Justice Department employee for their role in the Russia probe, as well as their criticism of the president in recent months. In an interview last night, former CIA Director John Brennan warned about a wag the dog type situation in which the president provokes a national security crisis to distract from unfavorable headlines.
The fact that he's using a security clearance of a former CIA director as a pawn in his public relations strategy, I think is just so reflective of somebody who, quite frankly, I don't want to use this term maybe, but he's drunk on power. He really is. And I think he's abusing the powers of that office.
Among those now in the president's sights, former head of the FBI, James Comey, former DNI, James Clapper, and Sally Yates. Democrats and dozens of former CIA officials have described it as an enemies list. The Washington Post reported last night the White House has already drafted orders from the president for more security clearances to be revoked, John.
So why is the president taking a look at Bruce Ohr? He's a relatively unknown figure in the Justice Department in particular.
Well, Bruce Ohr is a Justice Department prosecutor in the Organized Crime Division. Newly leaked texts show he was in touch with Christopher Steele, the former British spy who compiled an unverified dossier that included allegations that Russia had dirt on President Trump, including a sex tape. Ohr's wife, Nellie, worked for Fusion GPS, an opposition research firm hired by the Clinton campaign to investigate any ties Trump had to Russia. It is not clear whether Ohr was the actual conduit for the Steele dossier to the FBI. President Trump hinted at what he plans to do to Ohr's security clearance while leaving the White House Friday.
I think Bruce Ohr is a disgrace. I suspect I'll be taking it away very quickly. I think that Bruce Ohr is a disgrace with his wife Nellie. For him to be in the Justice Department and to be doing what he did, that is a disgrace.
If he removes his security clearance, that would effectively end the career of Bruce Ohr at the Justice Department. Ohr is slated to testify behind closed doors on Capitol Hill on August 28th, John.
Jennifer Griffin. Jennifer, thank you. For more on the fallout over security clearances and the extraordinary revelation that the president's own lawyer is cooperating with the special counsel, let's turn to Sagar Enjeti, White House correspondent for the Daily Caller. So we know that White House counsel Don McGahn has apparently been cooperating with Robert Mueller and meeting with him, giving him information. How strange is that?
Yes, it is unprecedented for the White House counsel to be sitting down with the special counsel, especially for such a lengthy period of time. But I think it does indicate the White House strategy towards the special counsel probe, which is they truly believe executive privilege in these matters because he has done absolutely nothing wrong. You see this in his repeated desire to sit down with the special counsel because he wants to tell the special counsel everything that he did during the campaign. He has been firm in his belief, and we hear it from him all of the time, that there was no collusion and there was no obstruction. And what was interesting in that New York Times report is it did say that the special that the White House counsel Don McGahn insisted in those 30 hours of interviews with Robert Mueller that at no point did the president exceed his authority as commander-in-chief.
It's interesting because the Times says, you know, what will be determinative here is how the president receives the news of McGahn's cooperation. Well, the president is out with that tweet just now in which he says he allowed Don McGahn to meet with the special counsel. According to the president, it's not a big deal.
Yes, exactly. The president's attitude toward this probe, to the documentation, to all the White House interviews, the reason he has waived executive privilege in so many cases is because, as I said, he is insistent. He is being remarkably cooperative to his own detriment. Many legal authorities say they're saying, you know, even if he has done absolutely nothing wrong, if this is truly a witch hunt, which they desire to take the president down, he should not be so open. But because all of this is essentially a political matter, matter. He's looking at this as, I have done nothing wrong. I did not collude with Russia. I did not obstruct justice. And so the best way that I can prove it is to let my officials spend as much time as they possibly need to speaking with the special counsel.
But the Times suggests that maybe McGahn is somehow trying to help himself or ensure that he himself does not get into trouble through these, by arranging these meetings. That somehow doesn't seem to make sense to me.
Yes, they perhaps could conflict. I mean, we are not in the room for many of these conversations, and it could also be a dual desire. It could be that the president desires for his special counsel to give as much time to Robert Mueller as possible, and it could also be that Don McGahn wants to give as much time to the special counsel as possible because he doesn't want to end up like John Dean, the Nixon administration official who was prosecuted during the Watergate scandal. So those aren't necessarily mutually exclusive, and it could be that he had told friends that the reason he was talking so much with the special counsel was because of this, but as I said, isn't mutually exclusive to the president's desire to be as open as possible with Robert Mueller.
So let's turn to the issue of these security clearances. About 60 former CIA chiefs and other CIA intelligence personnel wrote a letter to the president saying, this revoking of security clearances is a bad idea. General David Petraeus, former CIA chief, was one of them. The president doesn't seem to be swayed by that.
No, he doesn't. And many of the people, and we shouldn't forget here that Senator Richard Burr, the Senate Intelligence Committee chairman, is also very supportive of this decision. Because the way they see it is that, former Director Brennan is going on national television day after day, impugning the president's character and hinting at secret information about how the president has been colluding with Russia. And that based on that information, which is of course secret and that he cannot reveal. So the way they see it, he is exploiting the use of his security clearance and his supposed access to these documents or his supposed access to these past documents as a way to push a political narrative against the president, which he never once testified to under oath before Congress. So they're saying that his use of that authority is an abuse of the security clearance process, that it gives a veneer of authenticity to what he's saying, and so they would like to remove that veneer of authenticity and show him to be a political actor.
Senator Tim Scott also has shared some thoughts on this. He's the Republican from South Carolina. Listen to this.
We're fighting over whether or not he has it or whether we're taking it. The question is, how is America safer because he has it? If the answer is there really isn't a good answer for that question, then why does he have it? And there's not a good answer for that question, and taking it away seems plausible and logical.
Democrats say they want to introduce legislation that would prevent the president from doing this, but that doesn't have a chance of going anywhere in a Republican-controlled Senate.
Yes, exactly. Not only it's political stunt, obviously, on their side. And what it really is look, the president is the ultimate classification authority. Any information in the United States government, he can declassify or classify at his request. And there's a reason that we've invested our commander-in-chief with such broad-based authority. Now, the president's critics are saying that he is silencing John Brennan here. But as we saw, John Brennan came out and wrote an op-ed in the New York Times, and I think he's done more national television since he got his clearance stripped than before. And so it really is a matter of, this is a man who was going out and was insinuating different things about the president and about his supposed ties to the Russian government. And the White House looked at that and said, well, he's not going to do that with a current security clearance from the United States government.
Sagar Enjeti, the White House correspondent for the Daily Caller. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Tributes are pouring in from around the world after the death of 80-year-old Kofi Annan, the UN's first black African Secretary General. Annan's foundation says he passed away in Switzerland this morning shortly after falling ill. Annan won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2001 for his far-reaching humanitarian work. He served 2 terms as the UN's chief. His home country of Ghana has declared a week of national mourning in his honor. The jury in the Paul Manafort bank and tax fraud trial will pick up deliberations on Monday after a week in which jurors asked the judge to redefine reasonable doubt. Plus, horrific new details in the deaths of a mother and her 2 daughters in Colorado. What court documents say about how those children were found.
It's been earth-shattering. Our small department, 20 plus officers, we've been working around the clock on this. I don't want to say there's no end in sight, but it's certainly ongoing. This is absolutely the worst possible outcome that any of us could imagine. And I think our hearts are broken for the town of Frederick as much as anybody's.
Some disturbing new details in the deaths of a pregnant Colorado mother and her 2 daughters. Court documents reveal the kids were submerged in crude oil for 4 days before their bodies were recovered. Their father, Christopher Watts, is under arrest on suspicion of killing his family. Jeff Paul reports from Los Angeles. Jeff, the community, how are they responding to this tragedy?
Well, John, this all happened in a rural suburb 30 miles north of Denver in a town of about 8,500 people. The family was well known by many in the area who understandably right now are at a loss for words. That's why hundreds of those very folks saddened by the deaths of Shanann Watts and her 2 little girls, Bella and Celeste, showed up for a very emotional candlelight vigil. The crowd gathered outside the family's home, the scene where investigators believe husband and father, Christopher Watts, killed his family. They, like the family's babysitter, are trying to make sense of the unthinkable.
He's a monster who let us comfort him and felt absolutely no remorse for what he's done. God, I miss him.
That's uncomprehendable to me or to anyone in this community. It just doesn't happen. And it did right here.
Now, the day after they went missing, Christopher Watts gave an interview where he pleaded for his family's safe return, saying all he wanted was for them to come running through the door. He was arrested the following day, where police say he confessed to the killings. John?
So where does the investigation go from here?
Well, John, Christopher Watts will be formally charged on Monday. After that, he'll likely face a judge on Tuesday. The big unknown right now is how and why. Police are still investigating what led to Shanann and her daughter's deaths. They also haven't released any information surrounding a possible motive. We also know the lawyer for the suspect requested the DNA swabs be taken from the necks of the little girls and from the nails and hands of the mother. John?
What a disturbing story. Jeff Paul in Los Angeles, thank you. So California is in the middle of another record-breaking fire season, and political fights over the causes are heating up. William Lajeunesse has more on that controversy.
Look at that. As more fires burn longer, the blame game begins.
Some people would like to, they don't have a problem with watching habitat burn down, and yet the only endangered species happens to be a logger.
The people? Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke refers to are environmentalists who for years have fought efforts to clear dead and dying trees, which cause fires to grow bigger and burn faster.
The density of trees is historic. You have lack of public access. So we've closed a lot of roads. We've let roads overgrown so that even when a lightning strike or man-made fire occurs, we can't get at it.
Experts say Zinke is right. Overgrown forests help small brush fires grow out of control.
We'd like to be managing ecosystems with more prescribed fire to reduce fuels in the environment.
What got Zinke into trouble was a denial that climate change had, quote, nothing to do with wildfire. He has since walked it back.
Do you accept that climate change is part of the problem?
Of course. But the damage was done.
Warmer weather will mean a longer window in which forest fires are favored.
In Washington State, Governor Jay Inslee ripped Zinke, calling him a tool of the oil industry and a climate denier. While many experts say hotter summers, drier winters, reduced humidity lower a fire's ignition point, creating bigger fires year-round.
Climate change worsens fire seasons by having a longer fire season.
President Trump suggested California's water shortage hindered the state's ability to fight fire. Officials here say that's not true, though at times rules protecting wildlife prohibit taking water from wilderness areas. And while both sides point fingers, large fires continue burning, polluting the air, making climate change worse. And while there is general agreement among scientists on how to manage forests, that consensus does not exist among politicians. In Los Angeles, William Lajeunesse, Fox News.
With the nation in the middle of an opioid epidemic, U.S. Customs is working to try to stop the flow of the deadly drugs arriving on international flights. We'll tell you more. Plus, the jury set to reconvene next week as we await a verdict in the Paul Manafort trial. What the potential outcomes could mean for the Russia investigation. The jury will resume deliberating Monday in the trial of Paul Manafort, the former Trump campaign manager facing 18 counts, including tax and bank fraud. This as special counsel Robert Mueller's team recommends jail time for George Papadopoulos, the first Trump campaign advisor to plead guilty in the Russia probe. Garrett Tenney has more from Washington.
George Papadopoulos is a big reason why the FBI opened its investigation into possible collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia in the first place. The former Trump campaign advisor pleaded guilty in October to lying to FBI agents, and last night, special counsel Robert Mueller's team recommended the judge sentence Papadopoulos to up to 6 months in prison, along with a fine of $9,500. According to Mueller's sentencing memorandum, Papadopoulos, quote, lied in order to conceal his contacts with Russians and Russian intermediaries during the campaign and made his false statements to investigators on January 27, 2017, early in the investigation, when key investigative decisions, including who to interview and when, were being made. Papadopoulos is scheduled to be sentenced on September 7th. Next week, though, former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort is expected to learn his fate in the first of 2 trials Mueller's team has against him. After 14 hours of deliberation, the jury has not reached a verdict, and they won't be at it again until Monday morning. Manafort's attorneys said at this point they are feeling very confident.
Feeling clearly deliberating longer, it favors your client?
I do. I'm with this. And he does.
On Friday, Judge T.S. Ellis also denied a request by a handful of media outlets to unseal the names of the jurors and said he couldn't do that without endangering their safety because he has already received threats in this case himself and now has to travel with an armed detail from the U.S. Marshals. John?
Garrett Tenney. Garrett, thank you. For more on the Manafort trial and what it bodes for the Russia investigation, let's bring back Sagar Enjeti, White House correspondent for the Daily Caller. We know that Paul Manafort got swept up in this special counsel investigation, but the special counsel, the prosecutors never said that he did anything to try to sway the election, to try to get Russia involved in the election. This is all about his taxes and his finances.
Yes, both of the trials against Paul Manafort are not anything to have absolutely nothing to do with Russia. They do have to do with Ukraine and with Paul Manafort's efforts to embezzle and hide much of the funding that he received for illegally lobbying against Ukraine. But it's important to remember that some of the charges against Mr. Manafort, some of the investigation, actually date back all the way back to 2007 in the Eastern District of Virginia. And so these are long-held suspicions about Mr. Manafort, his ties to foreign governments, his illegal lobbying, and his efforts, frankly, to just avoid paying taxes in the U.S. so that he can buy some of the, extravagant clothing that we saw that was on display during that trial.
Yeah, the defense seems to feel pretty good about the fact that jury deliberations are continuing past the weekend. I mean, as far as the jurors are concerned, this is not an open and shut case.
Yes, the central thesis of the Manafort defense is that he is being unfairly mistreated by the special counsel and his office. That the only reason he is on trial today is because he was campaign manager for Donald Trump. And that because of that position, that the special counsel went fishing into his finances, spent, hundreds of hours with a team of investigators combing through his international tax schemes. And then for that reason, he is facing life in prison. And so the way that they are looking at it is that this is frankly a miscarriage of justice. That's how they see it, because from their perspective, there is no reason there is no reasonable way in which your average citizen who is engaging in this type of illegal behavior would be viewed by the government if he had not held the political position of campaign manager for the president.
Yesterday, before boarding Marine One, the president sort of distanced himself from Paul Manafort, but also defended him. Listen to what the president had to say.
I think the whole Manafort trial is very sad when you look at what's going on there. I think it's a very sad day for our country. He worked for me for a very short period of time, but you know what? He happens to be a very good person. And I think it's very sad what they've done to Paul Manafort.
The president has been asked if he would consider pardoning Paul Manafort if he's convicted. He hasn't answered that question yet, Sagar.
Yes, he's always said, I don't want to talk about that. Whenever he has something that he's considering, he'll just say he doesn't want to talk about it because he wants to leave the door open to any possibility. Whether he's considering it or not, I have absolutely no idea. But the way that, and you heard it there, when he was saying that it's very sad, is the president does feel badly that many of the people around him are ensnared in trials. And, Paul Manafort's case, he could face life in prison. Many of his closest associates have hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal bills. Some of his former advisors have even had to pull their children out of college to afford their legal bills. And that's what he means whenever it's saying it's very, very sad. And he looks at it that, only because Paul Manafort was his campaign manager that he's ensnared in this ongoing trial, the two trials that he's facing.
Yeah, because as you point out, there is another trial in September. And that, even if he is found not guilty on this one, the special counsel intends to move forward with that one.
Yes, that's right. It's coming up in September, and in that one, the special counsel is actually said to have even more evidence to pose against Paul Manafort. That one is really where we're going to hear a lot about his illegal lobbying efforts on the part of the Ukrainian government. And it's important to remember that that same probe actually ensnared multiple lawyers here in Washington, D.C., Tony Podesta, as well as other big-time lobbyists who were circumventing U.S. law by not registering as foreign agents and lobbying on behalf of the then pro-Putin Ukrainian government here in D.C.
And we have yet to see whether the president will sit down with special counsel Robert Mueller or his team and answer some of their questions. That answer yet to come. Sagar Enjeti from the Daily Caller, thank you.
Thanks for having me.
A new congressional report on the opioid crisis reveals fentanyl and other opioids are coming into the U.S. on international flights from China and Mexico. Customs and Homeland Security working round the clock to try to make sure those drugs do not make it to the streets. Claudia Cowan has more.
A bag of suspicious powder.
500 grams.
Could be opioids bought online, stopped by Customs and Border Protection at this entry point for international parcels, one of 9 in the U.S.
Fentanyl in particular is extremely dangerous. It's something that we intercept regularly.
While commercial shippers like FedEx and UPS must provide customs officials with packaging information in advance, making suspicious mail easier to spot, there's no such requirement for the U.S. Postal Service. And according to one congressional report, drug labs in China and Mexico are taking advantage of the situation, sending hundreds of pounds of deadly fentanyl and other illicit narcotics through the U.S. mail.
We've seen a lot of activity with, criminal organizations, transnational in scope, that again they recognize that they can make a lot of money with opioids, with fentanyl.
Drugs are tested and used as evidence by Homeland Security investigations and criminal prosecutions. But agents admit disrupting the illicit opioid supply chain is an uphill battle.
We're seeing huge increases, and it's challenging and it's troubling.
Congress is now considering legislation to beef up security around overseas mail. Ohio Republican Senator Rob Portman has introduced the STOP Act that would require the U.S. Postal Service to provide customs officials with electronic shipping data in advance, just like private mail carriers do now.
To me, this is shocking, and it should be something that we can do something about. This is a federal agency, after all.
The STOP Act has passed in the House and heads to a vote by the full Senate in the next few months. Meantime, every box, every letter is considered suspicious and subject to inspection. More than 1 million packages every month at this one facility alone. Nationwide, by one estimate, some 500 million pieces of mail every year. John?
Claudia Cowan, thanks. Well, a special anniversary for a historic warship. The USS Intrepid played a key role in the United States victory in World War II. Now, former crew members come together to celebrate the aircraft carrier that has turned into a museum. The Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor in 1941.
December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy.
The United States declared war on Japan and entered World War II.
With confidence in our armed forces, with the unbounding determination of our people, we will gain the inevitable triumph, so help us God.
There were 24 Essex-class aircraft carriers built during the war for the United States Navy. The USS Intrepid is one of them.
We honor you, we salute you, and we thank you. And I ask the former crew members, please stand so that we might recognize you.
Celebrating its 75th anniversary of service this weekend, former Intrepid crew members return for a very special ceremony.
To be able to celebrate what is 75 years since the day of the commissioning of the ship, which was August 16th, 1943, and have a weekend-long series of celebrations for what are 342 crew members from around the country, from 37 states, and there are 900 or so family and friends, guests, descend upon Intrepid. There's just nothing else like it.
Back when I was 18, I was proud I could get on the Intrepid ship. I always wanted to be in the Navy, and my dreams come true.
The carrier was called to duty again in 1952, participating in military exercises and supporting our allies during the Cold War.
At this moment, every ship in the force is ready to take to the air should the issue be forced. Every bomber has its load, and every fighter its scraping power.
My term of service was working on the flight deck. Everything on the flight deck within the V1 division, which was could be flight deck maintenance, the pushing of the aircraft, directing the aircraft around the flight deck, sometimes towing them. We could be in crash crews if a plane crashed on deck. We would have to get the pilots out and get the material off the flight deck.
She was later part of 3 tours of duty during the Vietnam War, when a young John McCain served as a pilot on board. Commander Tom Davis was involved in planning strike missions.
What keeps popping out in my mind is the tempo of operations that was such in contrast to my previous combat in Korea, where it was intense as well. But during the Vietnam period, it was much more intense. There was just simply no breaks. We were continuously on station.
One of the Intrepid's most remarkable stands in history. I remember as a kid watching the Intrepid sailing the Pacific, plucking astronauts out of the water.
Going to be recovering 2 space capsules, Mercury and Gemini, in 1962 and in 1965.
During that time, we practiced picking up the astronaut, and the Intrepid wanted to be authentic. So what the Intrepid did was they were looking for a person named Carpenter, and they're going to put him in a raft, and we practiced picking him up. But the Intrepid had nobody named Carpenter, so they took the ship's carpenter, and we put him in a life raft, and we practiced picking him up for a couple of days.
And since 1982, she's become one of the biggest tourist attractions in New York City. Berthed on the Hudson River, the USS Intrepid is home to the Sea, Air, and Space Museum, a reminder of sacrifice and freedom for all.
The stars and stripes are hoisted, and the flag is so big that the flagpole bends.
Our thanks to those who've served on the Intrepid and throughout the armed forces. Well, the search for a solution to Florida's toxic algae